Cherokee winds whispered ancient secrets across the Oklahoma plains, where honor ran as deep as bloodlines and a man's reputation could outlive him by generations. In this untamed territory, where both nature and men could break you as easily as make you, the Silver Creek Ranch stood as a testament to perseverance against all odds. Here, nestled between rolling hills and towering oaks, the Murray family had carved out their legacy, and no name commanded more respect than that of Gabriel Murray, whose Cherokee heritage and uncompromising principles made him both respected and feared throughout the county. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Murray Ranch sprawled across 15,000 acres of the most coveted grazing land in the territory. 20 seasoned ranch hands, over 10,000 head of cattle, and one undeniable force at its center, Gabriel Murray. But this story isn't about the father. It's about the son who walked between two worlds and the scarred woman everyone else had written off as cursed. Elijah Murray rode the fence line as the late autumn sun cast long shadows across the golden prairie grass. At 32, he embodied the striking features of his Cherokee heritage: high cheekbones, copper skin, and piercing dark eyes that missed nothing. Unlike many mixed-blood men of his generation who tried to hide their native ancestry, Elijah wore his with quiet pride, his long black hair tied back with a simple leather cord, his movements fluid and deliberate as his ancestors. He'd earned respect not through his family name, but through his own merit, his hands calloused from the same work as any hand, his judgment trusted by even the most experienced ranchers in 3 counties. The ranch hands called him the Quiet Storm, calm on the surface but possessing an intensity that could erupt when provoked. As the sun began its final descent, Elijah turned his stallion, Thunder, toward home. The massive red roan moved beneath him with powerful strides, a partnership forged through years of mutual respect. The main house came into view, a substantial 2-story structure built of local stone and timber that reflected Gabriel Murray's preference for substance over show. Lamps were already lit in the windows, golden squares of light against the deepening blue of twilight. Elijah dismounted at the stables, where Caleb, the teenage stable hand, hurried to take Thunder's reins. "Evening, Mr. Murray," Caleb said, his freckled face serious with responsibility. "Your father's been asking for you." Elijah nodded, removing his gloves. "Cool him down properly. He's had a long day." "Yes, sir, always do." Elijah paused to run a hand along Thunder's neck, a wordless communication between man and animal, before heading toward the house. The kitchen door opened before he reached it, releasing the warm scents of cornbread and stew into the evening air. Sarah Two Rivers, the housekeeper who had helped raise Elijah after his mother's death, stood in the doorway, her lined face serious beneath her silver-streaked hair. "He's in his study," she said without preamble. "Been there since the letter came." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "What letter?" Elijah asked, hanging his hat on the peg by the door. Sarah shook her head. "Not my place to say, but he's been as quiet as winter after it came." "That's never a good sign." Elijah recognized the warning in her words. His father's temper was legendary, explosive and direct, but his silence? That was something else entirely. Gabriel Murray's silence was the warning before the tornado touched down. The main house felt unusually still as Elijah made his way to the study, his footsteps echoing on the polished wooden floors. The door to his father's sanctuary stood partially open, golden lamplight spilling into the hallway. Elijah knocked once against the frame, then stepped inside. Gabriel Murray sat behind his massive oak desk, a gift from Elijah's mother on their 10th anniversary. At 65, Gabriel remained an imposing figure, broad-shouldered and straight-backed, His once black hair now mostly silver, but still thick and pulled back in the traditional style of his people. The lines etched in his face spoke of hardship weathered and battles won, but the intelligence in his dark eyes remained undimmed by age. "You wanted to see me," Elijah said, standing just inside the doorway. Gabriel looked up, his expression unreadable as he studied his son. On the desk before him lay an opened letter, the paper expensive and crisp, even from where Elijah stood. "The Robinson property," Gabriel said finally. "You've looked it over?" Elijah nodded. "Twice now. Good water rights, decent grazing land. The soil's poor on the eastern section, too much clay. Wouldn't support more than 3,000 head without. Significant investment. And the structures? Main house needs work. Roof sound but the foundation's shifting on the north corner. Outbuildings are solid enough. Nothing that can't be fixed with lumber and labor." Gabriel tapped his fingers against the desk. Rhythmic pattern Elijah recognized as his father considering his next words carefully. "And yet James Robinson can't make it profitable." Elijah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. 3 years of drought hit him hard. Lost nearly half his herd to disease after they weakened. Then there was the accident with his daughter. "I don't need excuses," Gabriel cut in, his voice flat as hammered iron. "I need solutions." The grandfather clock in the corner ticked 7 times before Elijah spoke again. "Why are we discussing Robinson's troubles?" A thin smile crossed Gabriel's face. "Because as of yesterday, his troubles are our opportunity." He slid a folded document across the polished desktop. Elijah didn't reach for the paper. "Meaning?" "Meaning I've arranged to acquire the Robinson property. Robinson would never sell to you." The words came sharper than Elijah intended. Gabriel's smile didn't falter. "He's not selling. He's merging." "Merging?" Elijah repeated the word. "Tasting strange. Since when do we take on partners?" Gabriel's laugh was short and dry. "We don't. But we do make marriages." The air in the room seemed to thin. Elijah felt a chill spread from his spine outward, the kind of cold that came before a lightning strike. "What did you do?" "Secured 5,000 acres of prime ranch land, water rights to Eagle Creek, and expanded our northern boundary to the ridge line." Gabriel tapped the document with one thick finger. "All perfectly legal and witnessed." Elijah finally picked up the paper, unfolding it with controlled movements that betrayed none of the storm building inside him. The contract was simple, direct, and binding. In exchange for forgiveness of substantial debts and a 20% interest in the combined operations, James Robinson would transfer ownership of his ranch to Murray Holdings upon the marriage of his daughter. To Elijah Murray. "You're selling me," Elijah said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Don't be dramatic," Gabriel countered. "I'm expanding our holdings through the most efficient means available. The Robinson girl brings with her the land, the water rights, and the goodwill of the northern families." Gabriel's voice hardened. "You're 32 years old. It's past time you settled. This arrangement solves multiple problems at once." Elijah carefully refolded the contract along its creases. "And if I refuse?" Gabriel's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop further. "Then I'll find someone who understands family loyalty and tribal responsibility. Perhaps your cousin Matthew would appreciate the opportunity to secure his future." The threat hung in the air, unspoken but clear. Elijah's position, his years of work, his future at the ranch, all could be passed to his cousin with a single word from Gabriel. "Does she know?" Elijah asked finally. "Her father presented the arrangement last week. And she's a woman with few prospects and a scarred family reputation. She accepted." Elijah turned toward the window, looking out over the ranch that had been his entire world. In the distance, a line of riders moved cattle toward the winter pastures, dust rising behind them like smoke signals against the darkening sky. "What's her name?" he asked, his back still to his father. "Clara. Clara Robinson. Elijah's memory stirred. James Robinson's daughter. He had vague recollections of a quiet girl with serious eyes at county gatherings years ago. She disappeared after the fire, he said quietly. She was badly burned in that barn fire 3 years back, Gabriel sighed, already returning his attention to his ledger. The matter settled in his mind. You've never even seen her, Elijah realized, turning back to study his father. They say her face. They say many things, Gabriel interrupted, impatience finally showing. What matters is the land and the alliance. She comes from good stock. Her mother was Southern, educated in Charleston. The girl reads, writes, and ciphers. She'll give you strong sons and won't embarrass you in company. That's more than most men get. Elijah's hand tightened around the contract. When? 2 weeks from Saturday, town church, small ceremony. Gabriel dipped his pen in ink. I expect you to conduct yourself with Murray dignity. This isn't a punishment, son. It's your inheritance expanding before your eyes. Elijah said nothing, recognizing the dismissal in his father's tone. He placed the folded contract in his vest pocket and walked to the door, each step measured and controlled. Elijah, his father's voice stopped him at the threshold. The Robinson girl may not be what you'd choose for yourself, but remember, in this life, we don't always get what we want. We get what we need to survive. That's the law of this land. Elijah didn't turn. Is that what my mother was to you? What you needed to survive? For a moment, something flickered across Gabriel's face, a shadow of something human and wounded. Then it was gone, replaced by the impassive mask he'd perfected over decades. Your mother understood her place in this world between two cultures, as will you. Elijah closed the door behind him without another word and strode through the main house, past ranch hands who knew better than to speak when the younger Murray moved with that particular set to his shoulders. He reached the stables and resaddled Thunder himself with quick, efficient movements, his mind 1,000 miles from his hands' work. Within minutes, he was riding hard toward the northern ridgeline, the only place on Murray land where he couldn't see the ranch buildings spread below. The only place where, for brief moments, he could pretend he was simply a man on a horse, not the heir to an empire built on his father's relentless determination. Thunder picked his way up the steep trail, sure-footed and patient. At the summit, Elijah dismounted and stood at the edge of the bluff, looking north toward the Robinson property. From this distance, it looked peaceful, a cluster of buildings nestled in the valley, smoke rising from the main house chimney, cattle scattered across the yellowing autumn grass. Somewhere in those buildings was a woman he'd never properly met, now bound to him by her father's desperation and his father's ambition. Clara Robinson, a woman hidden from the world after fire had marked her. A woman the townsfolk whispered was cursed. Damn you, father, Elijah muttered, though the wind carried the words away unheard. Thunder nickered softly behind him. Elijah turned and stroked the horse's sleek neck, drawing comfort from the simple, honest connection. Animals never lied, never manipulated, never saw you as anything but what you were. What am I going to do, Thunder? He asked quietly. The horse offered no answer beyond gentle brown eyes and soft breath against his palm. But as Elijah looked back toward the Robinson property, a strange thought occurred to him. If the townsfolk believed the woman was cursed, perhaps that made them a fitting pair, the half-Cherokee son and the scarred daughter, both caught between worlds that never fully accepted them. 2 days later, Elijah rode toward the Robinson property alone. He told himself it was just curiosity, nothing more. But as he approached the boundary line marked by a sagging fence and weathered signposts, he knew he was looking for something he couldn't name. The Robinson Ranch had once been prosperous, not on the scale of Murray Holdings, but respectable. Now he could see the signs of hardship everywhere, unpainted outbuildings, thin cattle, fields that should have been planted with winter feed lying fallow. Pride had kept James Robinson from seeking help until it was too late. Pride and something else, a stubborn independence that Elijah, despite himself, respected. A movement caught his eye near the smaller cabin set apart from the main house. A figure in a dark dress, head covered with a shawl, bent over what appeared to be a garden plot. Without conscious thought, Elijah turned Thunder off the main trail and toward the cabin. He was 50 yards away when the figure straightened, sensing his approach. She didn't run, didn't call out, just stood motionless, watching his advance. With the stillness of someone accustomed to observing rather than being observed. Elijah stopped Thunder at a respectful distance and removed his hat. "Miss Robinson." The woman didn't answer immediately. The shawl shadowed her face, revealing only the curve of her chin and the line of her throat. "Mr. Murray," she finally replied, her voice lower and steadier than he expected. "You're a long way from your father's land," so she knew who he was. Elijah inclined his head slightly. "Not for much longer, it seems." A sound escaped her, not quite a laugh, though. Something adjacent to it. "No, not for much longer." An awkward silence stretched between them. Elijah found himself uncharacteristically at a loss for words. This was not how he'd imagined their first meeting, though in truth, he hadn't imagined it at all until his father had placed that contract before him. "Was there something you needed?" she asked finally. Elijah realized he was staring and quickly gathered himself. "I thought perhaps we should speak before the ceremony. Is there something to discuss?" The arrangements seemed quite thorough. "The arrangements, yes," Elijah agreed, shifting slightly in his saddle. "But not the people affected by them." Now she did laugh, a brief, harsh sound that contained no humor. How unexpected. A Murray concerned with people rather than property. Her words stung more than they should have. "You don't know me." "And you don't know me," she countered. "Yet here we are, bound by documents neither of us signed." Elijah couldn't argue with her assessment. He dismounted, tying Thunder's reins loosely to a fence post. "Then perhaps we should remedy that." Clara Robinson took a step back as he approached, her hand rising to adjust her shawl, keeping her face in shadow. "There's no need," she said, and for the first time, he heard something like vulnerability in her voice. "You'll see everything you need to know soon enough." "I prefer to make my own judgments," Elijah replied quietly. For a long moment, she stood motionless. Then, with a deliberate slowness that suggested both resignation and defiance, she lowered the shawl. Elijah had prepared himself for scars, had steeled himself not to react, not to show any shock at whatever damage the fire had left behind. But nothing had prepared him for the reality of Clara Robinson. The left side of her face was indeed marked, with scars, a tracery of healed burns that pulled slightly at the corner of her mouth and spread upward across her cheekbone to disappear into her hairline. But it was not the scars that caught and held Elijah's attention. It was her eyes, gray as storm clouds, intelligent and utterly unafraid. They met his gaze with a directness few men, let alone women, ever showed him. They were eyes that had seen pain and survived it. Eyes that measured and weighed and found most wanting. And it was the unmarked side of her face, the perfect sweep of cheekbone, the curve of her jaw, the fullness of her mouth that completed a beauty more striking for its imperfection than any flawless face could claim. Elijah realized he was staring again and forced himself to speak. "The rumors greatly exaggerated your condition." A flash of something, anger perhaps, or disappointment, crossed her face. "Did they? How fortunate for you." "That's not what I meant, isn't it?" She pulled the shawl back over her head once again, casting her face in shadow. "You may tell your father his investment is not entirely damaged goods. I'm sure that will ease his mind, if not yours." Elijah felt a flush of shame heat his face. "Miss Robinson." "Clara," she corrected him. "If we're to be married, you should use my name." She regarded him steadily from beneath the shawl. "I know why you came." Curiosity, concern for your future, perhaps even pity. You've satisfied the first, need not worry about the second, and I will never accept the third. Now if you'll excuse me, I have work to attend to." She turned and walked toward the cabin, her back straight, her steps measured, no hesitation, no looking back. Elijah watched her go, aware that this brief encounter had shattered every assumption he'd made. He'd expected a meek, damaged woman, grateful for the security of the Murray name. Instead, he'd found someone who viewed their arrangement with the same clear-eyed pragmatism as he did, as a business transaction neither had chosen. What he hadn't expected was to find himself intrigued. As he mounted Thunder and turned back toward the main road, a strange thought occurred to him. For the first time in years, he was genuinely curious about what tomorrow might bring. Elijah returned to the Murray ranch with his thoughts in disarray. The evening sun cast long shadows across the valley as he guided Thunder through the main gates. Ranch hands tipped their hats as he passed, but he barely noticed, his mind still replaying the encounter at the Robinson property. He handed Thunder off to Caleb with a distracted pat to the horse's flank. "Cool him down properly. He had a good run today." "Yes, sir, Mr. Murray," Caleb replied, eyes curious but knowing better than to ask where the boss's son had been riding all afternoon. The main house loomed ahead, windows glowing amber in the twilight. Elijah paused at the bottom of the porch steps, suddenly reluctant to enter the domain his father ruled with such unyielding certainty. Inside those walls, decisions were made. Futures determined, all with the cold calculation of profit and loss. Outside, at least he could breathe. "You'll catch your death standing there like a fence post." The voice startled him. Sarah Two Rivers stepped out of the shadows at the far end of the porch, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the evening chill. The Cherokee woman had been the Murray housekeeper since before Elijah was born, and the closest thing to a mother he'd had since his own died when he was 10. "Just getting some air," Elijah replied, climbing the steps. Sarah's dark eyes missed nothing. "You rode to Robinson's." It wasn't a question. Elijah sometimes wondered if Sarah had some mysterious ability to read minds, though the more likely explanation was that Caleb had mentioned his horse's condition when he returned. "News travels fast," he said dryly. "Faster than wisdom, usually." Sarah folded her arms across her chest. "You met her?" Elijah nodded once, and he hesitated, unsure how to describe Clara Robinson. "She's not what I expected." A small smile lifted the corners of Sarah's mouth. "The best ones never are." She turned toward the door. "Your father's been asking after you. Dinner's in 20 minutes. Elijah sighed, removing his hat and running a hand through his dust-streaked hair. "I'll wash up." Sarah paused, her hand on the door handle. "Elijah." Her use of his first name, rare and always meaningful, made him look up. "Remember something. A marriage isn't made by the ceremony. It's built in the days that follow." Before he could respond, she disappeared inside, leaving him alone with her cryptic wisdom and the weight of his own conflicted thoughts. Dinner with Gabriel was a strained affair of clipped conversation about cattle prices and preparations for winter. Elijah answered his father's questions with minimal words, volunteering nothing about his ride to the Robinson property. If Gabriel suspected where his son had been, he gave no indication. It wasn't until they retired to the study for brandy that Gabriel broached the subject directly. Reverend Phillips confirmed the ceremony for 2 Saturdays from now. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass. 10 o'clock. I've invited Judge Hammond and Commissioner Taylor. Good connections to maintain. Elijah stared into his own untouched glass. And the Robinsons? Who will stand with them? Gabriel's expression suggested the question had never occurred to him. I imagine James will find someone suitable. Her mother's people. A flicker of annoyance crossed Gabriel's face. That connection is complicated. James didn't elaborate, and I didn't inquire. It's not relevant to our interests. Our interests. Always our interests, never the human. Concerns that might lie beneath the surface of business arrangements. I met her today, Elijah said quietly. Gabriel's eyebrows rose slightly. Did you now? And is she functional? The word struck Elijah like a physical blow. Functional? He repeated, unable to keep the edge from his voice. She's a woman, not a piece of machinery. You know what I mean, Gabriel replied impatiently. The talk about her injuries is greatly exaggerated, Elijah cut in. She bears scars, yes, but she's perfectly capable, intelligent, speaks her mind. The last part might prove problematic, Gabriel muttered, but as long as she can manage a household and bear children, the rest is immaterial. Elijah set his glass down with careful control. Is that how you viewed my mother? As breeding stock? The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Gabriel's face hardened into the mask Elijah knew too well, the expression that preceded either icy silence or explosive rage. Your mother, Gabriel said with dangerous quietness, understood her role in building this legacy. She never questioned what needed to be done. And that's why she withered away. The words escaped before Elijah could stop them, because she understood her role too well. Gabriel's hand tightened around his glass. For a moment, Elijah thought, his father might throw it. Instead, he set it down with deliberate care and rose to his feet. You will not speak of her that way, Gabriel said, each word precise as a knife cut. You, who barely remember her, have no right to judge what we built together. I remember enough, Elijah replied softly. I remember how she looked out windows, how she stopped singing, how the light went out of her eyes before the pneumonia took her body. Gabriel turned away, his broad shoulders rigid beneath his waistcoat. You were a child. You saw what children see, fragments without context. I saw enough. The grandfather clock ticked loudly in the silence that followed, each second stretching between them like a chasm neither could cross. The arrangements are made, Gabriel finally said, his back still turned. The Robinson girl will become a Murray. The properties will merge, and you will do your duty by this family. Your personal feelings on the matter are noted and irrelevant. Elijah stood, recognizing the dismissal. At the door, he paused. Her name is Clara. Gabriel didn't respond, and Elijah let himself out, closing the heavy oak door quietly behind him. In his room, Elijah sat at the edge of his bed, boots off, shirt half unbuttoned, and stared at nothing. The windows were open to the cool night air, carrying the distant sounds of the ranch settling into darkness, a dog barking at the bunkhouse, the creak of the windmill, a cowboy's harmonica playing a melancholy tune. His eyes fell on the small cedar desk in the corner where a sheet of cream stationery lay beside an inkwell. Before he could question himself, Elijah crossed to the desk, sat down, and picked up his pen. Miss Robinson, he began, then crossed it out. Clara, he wrote instead. Our meeting today was not what I intended. I spoke poorly and listened worse. For that I apologize. You are right that we find ourselves bound by documents neither of us signed. But perhaps we might find a way forward that honors both our situations, without surrendering our dignity in the process. I would like to call on you properly, if you would permit it, not to satisfy curiosity or ease concerns, but to begin whatever this is to become with honesty rather than assumption. Respectfully, Elijah Murray. He read the short note twice, unsure if he'd said too much or too little. Then, before he could reconsider, he folded the paper, sealed it with wax, and set it aside to be delivered in the morning. For the first time since his father had placed that contract before him, Elijah slept without dreams of escape. Dawn came early in the valley, painting the eastern sky in bands of gold and rose. Elijah was already up, dressed in a clean shirt and his better riding coat, not formal enough to suggest pretension, but a step above his everyday work clothes. He tucked the sealed note into his breast pocket and headed to the stables. "Taking Thunder out again?" Caleb asked, looking surprised to see Elijah so early. "No, saddle storm today," Elijah replied, referring to his gray gelding, a horse he typically reserved for town visits and the rare social occasion. Caleb's eyes widened slightly, but he nodded and set about preparing the horse. Elijah busied himself checking the saddle, adjusting the stirrups, small tasks to occupy his hands while his mind raced ahead to the Robinson property. He was halfway there when he spotted a rider coming toward him, a lean figure on a compact sorrel mare, moving at an unhurried pace. As they drew closer, Elijah recognized James Robinson by his distinctive weathered hat and the way he sat a horse straight back despite the burden of years and hardship. They met where the road forked, one branch leading to town, the other to Murray Ranch. Elijah reined Storm to a stop and touched the brim of his hat in greeting. "Mr. Robinson, young Murray." Robinson's weathered face gave little away, but his eyes, the same storm gray as his daughter's, were sharp and assessing. Early for a social call, Elijah straightened slightly in the saddle. "I was hoping to speak with Clara." Something flickered across Robinson's face, surprise perhaps, or wariness. "Were you now?" "With your permission, of course," Elijah added, though they both knew the formality was hollow. In 2 weeks' time, he would have the legal right to speak with Clara whenever he pleased, regardless of her father's wishes. Robinson studied him for a long moment. "She's not at the ranch. Rode into town at first light. Something about books for the schoolteacher." Disappointment settled in Elijah's chest, though he kept his expression neutral. "I see. Perhaps another time then." He made to turn Storm back toward Murrayland, but Robinson's voice stopped him. "She'll be at Harper's store until midday." The older man's tone was carefully even. "Tends to lose track of time around books." Elijah looked back, surprised at the implicit permission in Robinson's words. "Thank you." Robinson merely nodded, then clicked his tongue to urge his mare forward. As they passed, he said quietly, "She reads like most men breathe. Necessary and constant." Before Elijah could respond, Robinson rode on, his straight back and proud posture belying the financial ruin that had driven him to the arrangement with Gabriel Murray. Elijah watched him go, struck by the dignity the man maintained, even in defeat. Then he turned Storm toward town, the note in his pocket feeling suddenly inadequate for the conversation that lay ahead. Silver Creek was hardly more than a wide spot in the road, collection of wooden buildings, strung along a single dusty main street with the church steeple providing the only vertical ambition. But it served as the commercial and social center for the scattered ranches that surrounded it, and on a Saturday morning, the hitching posts were crowded with horses and wagons. Elijah dismounted in front of Harper's General Store, securing Storm's reins with a quick knot. He paused on the boardwalk, suddenly uncertain. What exactly was he hoping to accomplish? The marriage was set, the contract signed. Was this attempt? What? Courtship? Understanding? Was it merely a salve for his conscience? He removed his hat and ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture he'd never quite outgrown. Then, squaring his shoulders, he pushed open the door, setting the small bell above it to jingling. The interior of Harper's was a carefully organized chaos of merchandise shelves stacked with canned goods and dry staples, barrels of flour and sugar, tools hanging from the rafters, and glass cases displaying everything from patent medicines to hair combs. The air smelled of coffee, leather, and the faint sweetness of peppermint sticks. Elijah scanned the store, nodding politely to Mrs. Harper behind the counter, and a couple of ranchers' wives examining bolts of fabric. Then he spotted her in the back corner, half hidden in the narrow alcove where Mr. Harper kept his small selection of books. Clara stood with her back to the room, her light brown hair braided and hanging down her back. She wore a simple dress of deep green, modest and Practical, with none of the bustles or frills the town women favored. Without the shawl obscuring her profile, Elijah could see the graceful line of her neck, the straight set of her shoulders. She was so absorbed in the book open in her hands that she didn't notice his approach until he was just a few feet away. When she finally sensed his presence and turned, Elijah had the strange satisfaction of seeing genuine surprise flash across her face before her composed mask returned. "Mr. Murray," she said, closing the book but keeping her place with one finger. "This is unexpected." Elijah realized he was still clutching his hat in his hands like some nervous schoolboy. He resisted the urge to fidget with the brim. "Miss Robinson, your father mentioned I might find you here." Clara's eyebrow rose slightly. "Did he? How helpful of him." "I had planned to call at your ranch this morning," Elijah explained, feeling oddly defensive. "I wanted to," he stopped, suddenly aware of Mrs. Parker and Mrs. Donnelly watching them with poorly disguised interest from the fabric counter. Clara followed his gaze and gave a small, understanding nod. "Perhaps we might continue this conversation outside." Relief flooded through him. "Yes, please." They made their purchases separately. Clara, the book she'd been reading. Elijah, a sack of peppermint sticks he had no particular desire for but grabbed as a pretense, and met again on the boardwalk. Outside, Silver Creek's main street was busy with Saturday traffic, offering little privacy for conversation. Without discussion, they fell into step together, walking toward this small town square where a lone cottonwood tree provided shade over a simple wooden bench. "You had something to discuss?" Clara prompted as they reached the relative privacy of the tree. Elijah reached into his pocket and withdrew the sealed note, now feeling foolish. "I wrote this, but perhaps it's better to simply say it." He tucked the note away again. "I want to apologize for yesterday. My approach was clumsy." Clara studied him, her expression guarded. "You surprised me, that's all. I didn't expect a reception before the ceremony." The implication that she expected to be ignored until legally bound to him struck Elijah like a physical blow. "Is that what you thought? That I would simply appear at the church, speak the words, and lead you away like a purchased mare?" A flash of something anger, perhaps, sparked in her gray eyes. "Isn't that precisely what this arrangement is? A transaction? Your father acquires land and water rights. My father keeps his home and dignity. You get a wife. I get security." Put so baldly, Elijah couldn't deny the accuracy of her assessment. "And yet, it doesn't have to be only that," he said quietly. Clara looked away, her profile to him now, the scarred side hidden. "Doesn't it? Your father made this arrangement without meeting me, without caring who I am beyond my name and what comes with it. You rode to our property yesterday to satisfy your curiosity about the damaged goods you're receiving." "That's not fair," Elijah protested, though part of him acknowledged the grain of truth in her words. "Isn't it?" She turned back to him, eyes challenging. "Would you be standing here now if my face were unmarked? If I were just James Robinson's plain daughter with good breeding stock and useful property?" The question knocked the breath from him. Would he? If Clara had been an ordinary young woman from a failing ranch, would he have fought his father's arrangement or simply accepted it as the price of inheritance? Would he have sought her out before the ceremony, tried to establish some human connection beneath the business transaction? He didn't know, and his hesitation must have shown on his face. Clara nodded slightly, as if confirming something to herself. "You see, even you can't answer that." Her voice held no bitterness, just a clear-eyed pragmatism that was somehow worse. "So let's not pretend this is anything but what it is." Elijah felt something slipping away, not a romance. Nothing so formed as that, but a possibility he hadn't realized he wanted until this moment. "I'm not pretending," he said, more forcefully than he intended. "Yes, this began as my father's arrangement. Yes, I rode to your property out of curiosity about who I was being bound to. But standing here now, talking to you, this is my choice, mine alone." She regarded him steadily, neither accepting nor rejecting his words. "And what exactly are you choosing, Mr. Murray?" "To know you," he said simply. "Before vows make it an obligation rather than a desire." A faint pink tinged her unmarked cheek, though her expression remained composed. "Pretty words." "Honest ones," he countered. "I don't have my father's gift for manipulation. What you see is what you get with me." "And what exactly am I seeing?" she asked, a hint of challenge in her voice. Elijah considered the question seriously. A man caught between duty and desire. A rancher who respects the land but questions the cost of keeping it. Someone who spent his life meeting expectations without examining them. He met her gaze directly. Someone who would like the chance to be more than his father's son and your reluctant husband. For the first time, he saw something soften in Clara's expression, not surrender, but perhaps a willingness to consider possibilities beyond the rigid framework they'd both assumed. "That's a more thoughtful answer than I expected," she admitted. Elijah smiled slightly. "I'm occasionally capable of thought. Just don't tell my father. He prefers unquestioning obedience." A small answering smile tugged at the corner of her mouth, transforming her face in a way that made Elijah's breath catch. "Your secret is safe with me." They sat in surprisingly comfortable silence for a moment, the sounds of the town continuing. Around them, wagon wheels on dirt, snatches of conversation, a dog barking somewhere down the street. "The book," Elijah finally said, nodding toward the brown paper package in her lap. "What is it?" Clara hesitated, then unwrapped it enough to show him the cover. "Principles of Veterinary Medicine and Animal Husbandry." Elijah's eyebrows rose. In genuine surprise. "That's not what I expected." "A romance novel, perhaps." Her tone was dry. "Something appropriately feminine?" He had the grace to look embarrassed. "I didn't mean—" "I know what you meant," she interrupted, but without heat. "Everyone has expectations of what a woman should read, should know, should be. This," she tapped the book, "is practical. We've lost too many cattle to preventable illness." "Knowledge is never wasted, Mr. Murray." "Elijah," he said. "If I'm to call you Clara, then please, it's Elijah." She studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Elijah." Something shifted between them with the exchange of names, not intimacy exactly, but a step away from the formal distance of strangers. "I should return to the ranch," Clara said, rewrapping her book. "My father will be wondering." Elijah stood. When she did, oddly reluctant for the conversation to end. "May I call on you tomorrow? Properly this time through the front door?" Clara considered him, her head tilted slightly. "For what purpose?" "To continue this," he said simply. "To talk. To know each other before we're bound by law and not just circumstance." She was quiet for so long that Elijah thought she would refuse. Then, with a small nod that contained neither enthusiasm nor dread, just calm acceptance, she said, 3:00. "Father naps then. We can speak freely." 3:00, Elijah confirmed, unable to keep a small smile from his face. "Thank you." Clara adjusted her shawl, arranging it to partially shadow the scarred side of her face, a habitual gesture, Elijah now realized, not a response to his presence. "Don't thank me yet, Elijah Murray," she said quietly. "You may find you prefer mystery to reality." Before he could respond, she turned and walked away, her straight back and measured stride drawing more than a few curious glances from Silver Creek Saturday shoppers. Elijah watched her go, aware that for the first time since his father had presented that contract, he was looking forward to tomorrow rather than dreading it. What had begun as his father's calculated arrangement was becoming something he couldn't yet name, but something that against all odds felt like the first honest thing in his life in years. Sunday passed with excruciating slowness for Elijah. He attended church service in town with his father, nodding mechanically at the neighbors and business associates who approached to congratulate Gabriel on the upcoming merger with the Robinson property. The Robinsons themselves were notably absent from the pews, a fact that prompted whispered speculation among the congregation. "Haven't seen that girl in church for years," Mrs. Blackwood murmured to her husband, just loudly enough for Elijah to overhear. "Not since the accident. Some say it turned her bitter toward God. Others say she's cursed-marked by the devil himself." Elijah bit his tongue, resisting the urge to defend a woman he barely knew. What right did these people have to judge Clara's faith or lack thereof? What did any of them know about living with visible scars in a world that valued women primarily for their unblemished appearance? By 3 o'clock the following day, Elijah had changed his shirt twice and paced the length of his bedroom enough times to wear a path in the floorboards. He told no one at the ranch where he was going, not even Sarah, who had given him a knowing look when he'd asked for a fresh-pressed shirt. He rode Storm at an easy canter toward the Robinson property, the afternoon sun warm on his back. The Foon land between the two ranches was beautiful in its stark way-rolling grasslands dotted with sage, framed by the distant blue mountains. Land that would soon be united under the Murray name, if not the Murray spirit. The Robinson ranch appeared more welcoming in the full light of day than it had on Elijah's previous visits. Someone had swept the front porch of the main house and placed a pot of late-blooming wildflowers beside the door. The windows gleamed, freshly washed, and the yard had been recently raked clear of debris. Elijah tethered Storm to the hitching post, removed his hat, and smoothed his hair before approaching the door. Before he could knock, it swung open to reveal Clara, dressed in a simple skirt and blouse of deep autumn gold that complemented her copper-tinged hair and storm-gray eyes. "You're punctual," she said, her tone neither approving nor disapproving, merely observant. "My grandmother's influence," Elijah replied with a small smile. She believed tardiness was a form of dishonesty, a lie about the value of other people's time. Something flickered in Clara's eyes, interest perhaps, a wise perspective. She stepped back, opening the door wider. "Please come in." The interior of the Robinson home was modest but meticulously kept. The furnishings were old but of good quality, showing the care of generations. Bookshelves lined one wall of the sitting room, filled not with decorative volumes but well-worn, clearly read books. A patchwork quilt in geometric patterns draped the back of a rocking chair, its colors still vibrant despite obvious age. "My father is resting," Clara said, gesturing toward a doorway at the back of the house. "His health has been uncertain since last winter." Elijah nodded, hearing the concern beneath her measured words. "I'm sorry to hear that." Elijah listened, watching how her eyes focused on some middle distance as she recounted the facts with detached precision. "The flames caught so quickly. I tried to smother them with a blanket, but the hay—" She shook her head slightly. "My father pulled me out. He burned his hands badly. We lost most of our winter feed, and I lost—" Her fingers rose unconsciously to the scarred side of her face. "Well, you can see what I lost." "I'm sorry," Elijah said, the words feeling woefully inadequate. Clara's gaze snapped back to him, suddenly sharp. "Don't be, I'm not. Scars mean survival, not failure." A hint of defiance entered her voice. "I'm still here. The ranch is still here. That counts for something." "It counts for everything," Elijah replied with quiet intensity. Something shifted in Clara's expression, a slight softening, a lowering of defenses. "This arrangement between our families," she said after a moment, "what do you truly think of it?" The directness of the question caught Elijah off guard, though he should have expected no less from her. He considered his response carefully, aware that platitudes or evasions would likely end whatever fragile connection they were building. "I think," he began slowly, "that it's a bargain made by desperate men for different reasons. My father wants land and legacy. Yours wants security and dignity. Neither considered what we might want. And what do you want, Elijah Murray? Clara asked, her gray eyes steady on his. Elijah found himself at a rare loss for words. What did he want? Freedom from his father's iron control? Purpose beyond accumulating more acres, more cattle, more wealth? Connection that went deeper than business and obligation. I want, he finally said, to build something that's mine. Not my father's vision, not his legacy continued through me, but something I can look at and know came from my own mind and hands. He met her gaze directly. And I suspect you want something similar. Clara didn't answer immediately, weighing his words. I want to preserve what my grandfather and father built, she said at last, but also to make it stronger, better, different. She traced the rim of her cup with one finger. The world doesn't stand still. Those who refuse to adapt disappear. Like the buffalo, Elijah said quietly. Clara's eyes flickered with something recognition, perhaps that he understood more than she'd given him credit for. Yes, like the buffalo. The conversation shifted then to more practical matters, the daily operations of their respective ranches, the challenges of the coming winter, the regional politics that affected cattle. Prices. Elijah found himself increasingly drawn into Clara's quick intelligence and pragmatic perspective. She spoke about ranching not with his father's ruthless calculation or the romantic notions of Eastern writers, but with the clear-eyed understanding of someone who respected the land enough to work with it rather than against it. You should see our northern pasture, she said, warming to the subject. The grasses there are different, thicker, more resilient, something in the soil perhaps. The cattle that graze there produce calves with better winter survival rates. I'd like that, Elijah said, surprising himself with his sincerity. To see it, I mean. Clara studied him for a moment, then nodded decisively. The tea is getting cold, and daylight won't last forever. If you have time, we could ride out there now. The suggestion was practical, not romantic, but Elijah felt a surge of anticipation nonetheless. I'd like nothing better. While Clara readied her mare, a compact, intelligent-looking bay named Willow, Elijah waited in the yard, watching how she moved with the horse, murmuring to it softly in a language he didn't recognize. They rode side by side across the eastern fields, Clara pointing out features of the land with the confidence of someone who knew every rise and hollow. Elijah listened and observed, struck by how differently she saw the same landscape he had ridden past countless times without truly seeing. There, she said, gesturing toward a natural depression where the grass grew thicker and greener than the surrounding area. We call this the cradle. It catches rainwater and holds moisture longer than the higher ground. In dry years, it's the difference between survival and ruin. My father would have dammed it, Elijah remarked. Turned it into a proper stock pond. Clara shook her head. That would destroy the natural flow. The water needs to seep slowly through the soil, nourishing everything downslope. She glanced at him. Not everything needs to be controlled to be valuable. She nudged Willow closer to Storm, their legs nearly touching as they rode. What I saw back there, how you faced down those men without threats or violence, that's a different kind of power. The simple observation, delivered without flattery or agenda, struck Elijah more deeply than any praise he'd received from his father. I'm not him, he said quietly. I don't want to be. Good, Clara replied. The territory doesn't need another Gabriel Murray. Her voice softened slightly. But it might need you. As they crested the final rise before the Robinson Ranch came into view, Elijah reined in, looking out over the land that would soon be joined with his family's holdings, not through conquest or manipulation, but through a union between two people who were beginning, against all odds, to see each other clearly. Thank you, he said, for showing me your land today, for helping me see it through your eyes. Clara studied him, the setting sun casting half her face in golden light, the other in shadow, both sides equally compelling to him now. "Perhaps next time," she said with the barest hint of a smile, "you can show me yours." The simple suggestion, with its promise of future conversations and shared understanding, felt more significant than any formal agreement his father had engineered. As they rode the final distance to the Robinson ranch house, Elijah realized that what had begun as an unwanted obligation was transforming, slowly but undeniably, into something he found himself wanting to pursue of his own accord, not for land or legacy, but for the chance to know the remarkable woman who rode beside him, and perhaps in time, to become the kind of man worthy of her respect. The days following Elijah's visit to the Robinson property took on a strange dreamlike quality. He went about his duties at the Murray Ranch with mechanical precision, inspecting fences, overseeing cattle rotation, reviewing supply inventories for winter, but his mind continually drifted eastward to Clara. Their encounter with the eastern mining men had revealed layers to her he hadn't anticipated: her quiet authority, her natural leadership, her fierce protectiveness of the land and community. These qualities both intrigued and challenged him, making him increasingly aware of the gap between the man he was and the man he wanted to be. Gabriel noticed his son's distraction during their evening meal 4 days before the wedding, his shrewd eyes narrowing as Elijah pushed food around his plate without eating. "You've been riding out every afternoon this week," Gabriel observed, cutting into his steak with surgical precision. "Checking the eastern boundaries, Thompson tells me." Elijah met his father's gaze evenly. "Among other things." "Other things including the Robinson girl, I presume." There was no point denying it. "Her name is Clara." Gabriel set down his knife and fork with deliberate care. "I'm aware of her name. What I'm less clear on is why you're spending so much time at the Robinson place before the contracts are finalized." "Maybe I want to know the woman I'm marrying," Elijah said, unable to keep a hint of challenge from his voice. "A noble sentiment," Gabriel replied with the faintest trace of mockery. "Unnecessary, but noble." He reached for his wine glass. "Just remember what matters in this arrangement: the land, the water rights, the buffer against eastern mining's expansion." Elijah's head snapped up. "You know about eastern mining?" "Of course I know," Gabriel said, his tone suggesting the question was barely worth answering. "Carson at the bank keeps me informed of all significant movements in the territory. Eastern mining's been buying up distressed properties for over a year now." "Then you know they're threatening the Robinsons and likely have their eye on our eastern boundary." Gabriel shrugged one massive shoulder. "Business is business. The weak fall to the strong. It's the natural order of things. There's nothing natural about forcing people off land they've worked for generations," Elijah argued, his appetite completely gone now. "Sentiment," Gabriel dismissed. "The territory is changing, Elijah. Those who adapt survive. Those who cling to the past disappear." He fixed his son with a penetrating stare. "Which is precisely why our arrangement with the Robinsons is sound strategy. We preserve what's valuable: the land, the water, the breeding stock, while discarding what's obsolete." "And what's obsolete in your calculation?" Elijah asked quietly. "The people, their history, their connection to the land." Gabriel's expression hardened. "Don't confuse business with emotion. That's always been your weakness." "It's an investment in our future," Elijah corrected. "If we let Eastern mining get away with this, they'll only grow bolder. Today it's the Robinson pasture. Tomorrow it could be our water rights." He could see his father weighing the argument, assessing it not on moral grounds, but purely in terms of practical advantage. That was the key to persuading Gabriel Murray, appealing not to his heart, but to his strategic mind. "There's merit in your reasoning," Gabriel finally conceded. A strong response now might discourage further encroachment. It wasn't a warm endorsement, but it was enough. Elijah nodded, accepting the qualified victory. "Then we're agreed. The wedding proceeds, and we accelerate the property merger." Gabriel regarded his son thoughtfully. Agreed. Though I'm more interested in what's behind this sudden assertiveness than in Eastern mining's petty tactics. Elijah met his father's penetrating gaze steadily. Let's just say I found something worth fighting for. As he left the study, Elijah felt a sense of purpose he had rarely experienced before. The fire at the Robinson property had been meant to divide and weaken, to force desperate decisions. Instead, it had clarified his path forward and strengthened his resolve. In 3 days, he would marry Clara Robinson, not just because a contract demanded it, but because standing beside her against those who threatened their way of life felt like the first truly right choice he had made in years. Dawn broke clear and cold on the day before the wedding. Elijah rode out early, before most of the ranch hands had even stirred from their bunks. He carried with him not only Sarah's basket of fresh bread and preserves, but also a leather portfolio containing documents he'd spent half the night preparing. The Robinson ranch appeared subdued in the pale morning light. Smoke still drifted occasionally from hot spots in the northern pasture, and the acrid smell of burnt grass hung in the air. As Elijah approached the main house, he saw James sitting on the porch steps, a cup of coffee cradled in weathered hands. "Morning, Mr. Robinson," Elijah called, dismounting and tethering Storm to the hitching post. James nodded in greeting, his face etched with exhaustion, but his eyes clear. "Didn't expect to see you back so soon. Thought you might need an extra pair of hands today," Elijah replied, climbing the steps to join the older man. "How are you holding up?" James's gaze drifted toward the blackened pasture. "Had worse days, had better ones too." He took a sip of his coffee. "Clara's been up since before light, recalculating feed stores for winter." "That sounds like her," Elijah said with a small smile. Practical to the core, something softened in James's expression. "Gets that from her mother. Never met a problem she couldn't figure a way around." It was the first time James had mentioned Clara's mother in a personal way, and Elijah felt a small door opening between them. "I'd like to hear more about her someday," he said quietly, "if you're ever inclined to share." James studied him for a long moment. "You know, when Gabriel Murray proposed this arrangement, I expected his son to be just like him. All business, no heart." He shook his head slowly. "Seems I was wrong." Before Elijah could respond, the front door opened, and Clara appeared. She wore a simple work dress with her hair braided down her back, and despite the shadows of exhaustion beneath her eyes, she carried herself with the same quiet dignity Elijah had come to admire. "Elijah," she said, surprise evident in her voice. "I didn't think you'd—" She stopped, collecting herself. "Good morning." "No," he admitted quietly, "not anymore." Sarah nodded as if confirming something she'd already known. "I brought you something." She opened the small box to reveal a pair of silver cufflinks intricately patterned with a Cherokee design. "These were my brother's. He wore them the day he married. A Cherokee man and a white settler's daughter who found something worth building together." She placed them in Elijah's palm. Seemed fitting. Elijah closed his fingers around the small treasures, deeply moved. "Sarah, I can't take these." "You can and you will," she interrupted firmly. "They belong with someone who understands what they represent." As he fastened the cufflinks, Elijah thought about what they symbolized: the joining of different worlds, the courage to forge a new path between traditions, the possibility of bridging divides that others considered unbridgeable. "Thank you," he said simply. Sarah straightened his lapels with maternal care. "Your mother would be proud today," she said quietly. "Not of the land or the deal, but of you." Before Elijah could respond to this unexpected sentiment, another knock sounded harder, more peremptory. The door opened to reveal Gabriel, resplendent in his finest suit, his expression unreadable. "It's time," he announced. "The Robinsons have arrived." Sarah squeezed Elijah's arm once before slipping out, leaving father and son alone in a moment that suddenly felt weighted with decades of unspoken words. "Well," Gabriel said, surveying his son with critical eyes, "you look the part." "Is that all that matters?" Elijah asked. "Looking the part?" Gabriel's brow furrowed slightly. "It matters that you remember who you are. A Murray. Whatever sentiments you may have developed for the Robinson girl, don't forget what this union is truly about. And what is it truly about, Father?" Elijah challenged quietly. "Legacy," Gabriel replied without hesitation. "Expansion, security." Elijah nodded slowly. "Those things matter, yes, but they're hollow without something more." "Save the poetry for your vows," Gabriel dismissed, checking his pocket watch. "The minister is waiting." As they walked toward the church sanctuary, Elijah felt a strange calm settling over him. The nervous energy that had plagued him all morning transformed into quiet certainty. Whatever his father's motivations, whatever circumstances had brought them to this day, what happened next would be his choice. The small church was surprisingly full. The front pews held the territorial judge, the banker Mr. Carson, and other business associates of Gabriel's. Behind them sat neighboring ranchers and townspeople, their expressions ranging from curiosity to genuine goodwill. Along the east wall stood several Cherokee families from the settlement beyond Murray land, honoring the connection through Elijah's mother that Gabriel rarely acknowledged. Elijah took his place before the altar, where the minister waited with an expression of professional solemnity. As the small organ began to play, the congregation rose and turned toward the doors. James Robinson entered first, tall and proud, despite the years of hardship etched in his face. Behind him came Clara. Elijah's breath caught at the sight of her. She wore not white, but a dress of deep forest green that echoed the Oklahoma hills. Her light brown hair was partly braided with silver threads, partly flowing loose down her back. She carried no flowers but walked with straight-back dignity, her gaze steady. As father and daughter approached the altar, Elijah noticed that Clara wore no veil. Her scars were visible to all, not hidden as many had expected. The whispers that rustled through the congregation confirmed that this choice had surprised them, as much as it moved him. James placed his daughter's hand in Elijah's with quiet dignity. Their eyes met briefly, man to man, father to future son, before James stepped aside. Now Clara stood beside Elijah, her hand warm in his, her gray eyes clear and direct. In them, he saw neither fear nor resignation, but a calm courage that humbled him. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, his voice carrying through the hushed church, "we are gathered here today." The ceremony proceeded with traditional words, promises of honor, loyalty, faithfulness spoken by two people who had begun as strangers thrust together by circumstance, and now stood as allies by choice. When the time came for the rings, Elijah slipped a simple gold band onto Clara's finger, not an ornate Eastern showpiece as Gabriel might have preferred, but something practical and lasting, like the woman who would wear it. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride." This moment, their first true intimacy, would be witnessed by the entire community. Elijah was acutely aware of his father's calculating gaze, of the curious stares fixed on Clara's scarred cheek, of the expectations and judgments that surrounded them. He leaned forward slowly, giving Clara time to prepare, to turn her unmarked side toward him if she wished. But she faced him squarely, holding his gaze with quiet dignity. Their lips met in a kiss that began as a formality but softened into something genuine, brief but tinged with promise. When they parted, Elijah saw surprise and something warmer flicker in Clara's eyes before her composed expression returned. "Mrs. Murray," he murmured, "just for her." "Mr. Robinson," she returned with the ghost of a smile. Together they turned to face the congregation as the minister presented them as man and wife. The applause that followed was polite rather than enthusiastic, But Elijah noticed several genuine smiles among the neighboring ranchers, people who recognized that this union might strengthen the entire community against outside threats. The traditional wedding dinner was held at Murray Ranch. The long dining table extended to accommodate important guests. Gabriel presided at one end, all genial host and successful patriarch, while James sat at the opposite end, dignified despite his discomfort in such formal surroundings. Elijah and Clara occupied the middle, fielding congratulations and navigating the subtle currents of power and politics that flowed around them. Through it all, Elijah remained acutely aware of Clara. Beside him, her straight posture, her measured responses, her unflinching gaze when addressed directly. She was, he realized with growing admiration, a natural diplomat. Where he had expected discomfort or resentment in this gathering of people who had long gossiped about her, she showed neither. Instead, she engaged with each guest appropriately, revealing a social intelligence that matched her practical knowledge. As the meal concluded, Gabriel rose to offer a toast. The room quieted immediately, all eyes turning to the cattle baron whose wealth and influence dominated the region. "To new beginnings," Gabriel declared, raising his glass, "and to the expansion of the Murray legacy through this advantageous union." His gaze swept the table. The combined Murray properties now represent the largest private holding in the territory, a force to be reckoned with in uncertain times. The emphasis on property rather than the marriage itself was unmistakable. Elijah felt Clara tense almost imperceptibly beside him. "Mr. Robinson," Gabriel continued, addressing James with practiced cordiality, "your contribution to this partnership ensures your family's place in the territory's future development." Contribution, as if James had simply transferred livestock, rather than entrusted his only daughter to the Murray name. Elijah saw the flicker of dignified pain in the older man's eyes, though James nodded with outward composure. Before Gabriel could continue, Elijah stood, taking up his own glass. The unexpected movement drew all eyes to him. "I'd like to add something," he said, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. This wasn't planned, wasn't discussed, but suddenly felt essential. "Today isn't just about land or cattle or water rights," he began, looking around the table at the assembled guests. "Though those matter, of course." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "It's about recognizing that true strength comes not just from accumulation, but from combination." He turned slightly toward Clara, meeting her questioning gaze directly. "The Robinson family brings to this union not just property, but wisdom, knowledge of the land that goes beyond ownership to true stewardship." His voice strengthened. "Knowledge that the Robinson Ranch has maintained, through drought and hardship because of Clara's intelligence and determination." Surprise flickered across several faces at the table, surprised that Elijah would publicly acknowledge his new wife's contributions rather than simply her father's assets. "In combining our families," Elijah continued, "we aren't simply expanding Murray Holdings. We're creating something new, a partnership that honors the best of both traditions." He raised his glass higher. "To my wife, Clara Robinson Murray, whose strength and wisdom will shape our future as surely as any deed or contract." A moment of startled silence followed before glasses rose throughout the room. "To Clara," several voices echoed, some with genuine warmth, others with curiosity about this unexpected turn. Elijah sat down, aware of his father's calculating gaze from the head of the table. But more important was Clara's expression beside him, surprise giving way to something deeper, more meaningful. Beneath the table, her hand found his and squeezed. Briefly, a gesture that conveyed more than words could have. The meal concluded with discussions of cattle prices and territorial politics, but a subtle shift had occurred. Elijah had publicly declared his respect for his new wife, establishing that this would not be a marriage where Clara disappeared into the Murray name. As guests began to depart, Gabriel cornered Elijah near the study door, his voice low but sharp. "Interesting performance. completely unnecessary and potentially undermining our position. It wasn't a performance, Elijah replied quietly, and our position is stronger with Clara recognized as a partner, not a possession. Gabriel's eyes narrowed. You're letting sentiment cloud your judgment. No, Elijah countered. I'm expanding my judgment to include factors you've always dismissed. He met his father's gaze directly. The world is changing, Father. Those who adapt survive. Before Gabriel could respond, James approached, nodding politely to both men. Elijah, the hands are ready when you are. For the cattle move, he clarified. Seeing Gabriel's confusion. Cattle move? Gabriel questioned sharply. What cattle move? Elijah straightened, facing his father squarely. The Robinson breeding stock. We're relocating them to the high meadow on our western boundary today. Today? Gabriel's voice rose slightly. On your wedding day? That wasn't discussed or approved. The merger agreement gives me operational authority over the combined properties, Elijah reminded him calmly. This is an operational decision to protect valuable assets. Father and son locked gazes in silent confrontation, the underlying message clear. Elijah was no longer merely following orders or seeking permission. He was acting as an equal partner. In the family business, making decisions based on his own judgment. After a tense moment, Gabriel gave a tight nod. Very well. But I expect a full accounting of costs and benefits. You'll have it, Elijah agreed, along with my complete rationale. As Gabriel walked away, James regarded Elijah with new respect. That wasn't easy. No, Elijah acknowledged. But necessary. He looked across the room to where Clara stood speaking with Sarah, the two women engaged in what appeared to be serious conversation. As if sensing his gaze, Clara looked up, meeting his eyes across the crowded parlor. No words passed between them, yet understanding flowed. She gave a small nod before excusing herself from Sarah and making her way toward him. The men are ready, she said simply when she reached them. I've changed into riding clothes, will you? The question carried more significance than its practical surface. It was an invitation to step fully into their partnership, beginning with the work that needed doing. Yes, Elijah replied. I'll be right with you. An hour later, they rode side by side at the head of a small procession, ranch hands from both properties, moving the precious Robinson breeding stock toward their new winter grazing grounds. Behind them, the sun cast their shadows long across the land that now united rather than divided their families. Not the traditional wedding day, Elijah observed, glancing at Clara in her practical riding clothes, her hair now braided simply for the work ahead. No, she agreed, a hint of amusement in her voice, but perhaps more fitting for us. Us, he repeated, liking the sound of it. We've come a long way from that first day at your garden. Clara's expression softened in the late afternoon. Light, you've come a long way, she corrected gently. From looking at you as an obligation to seeing you as a partner, Elijah finished. A strength, not a burden. She nodded, emotion briefly showing in her dark eyes before her practical. Nature reasserted itself. We have work to do. We do, he agreed. Not just today, but in all the days to come. He reached across the space between their horses, offering his hand. Clara looked at his outstretched hand, then at the man offering it, a man transformed. From reluctant heir to determined partner in the span of 2 short weeks. She placed her hand in his, their fingers interlacing with natural ease. Together, she echoed, the word carrying the weight of a vow more meaningful than those they had exchanged in the church. As they continued riding westward, the combined lands of Murray and Robinson spreading around them like a promise, Elijah recognized that what had begun as his father's business arrangement had become something neither Gabriel nor James could have anticipated. Not just a marriage of convenience or a merger of properties, but the foundation of a new legacy, one built on partnership, respect, and the courage to see beyond surface scars to the true worth beneath. 3 months later, the winter snows lay deep across the territory. Inside the main house, now expanded with Clara's sensible additions, a fire crackled in the hearth of the study that once had been Gabriel's exclusive domain. Now 2 desks faced each other across the room, one large and ornate, the other smaller but equally sturdy, where Clara kept the ledgers and correspondence that had doubled the ranch's productivity in a single season. Eastern Mining had made no further attempts against their property. Word had spread quickly through the territory that the Murray-Robinson alliance was not to be tested, especially after Elijah had helped organize neighboring ranchers into a mutual protection association. Even Gabriel had grudgingly acknowledged the wisdom of his son's approach, particularly when the spring cattle prices promised to reach record highs. But more important than the expanded boundaries or improved profits was the change that had come over the ranch itself. Where once silence and tension had ruled, now laughter and honest conversation flowed freely. Ranch hands from both properties worked side by side, sharing techniques and traditions. Sarah and Clara had transformed the kitchen into a gathering place where Cherokee elders and territorial officials alike found welcome. The cursed woman whispers had faded, replaced by a growing respect for Clara's intelligence and capability. Those who had once avoided her now sought her advice on breeding stock and rangeland management. As for the scars that had marked her as an outcast, they seemed to fade in importance with each passing day, not because they disappeared, but because people began to see beyond them to the person she truly was. On a particularly cold evening, as they sat together before the fire reviewing spring planting plans, Clara looked up to find Elijah watching her with a quiet intensity that still had the power to make her heart quicken. "What?" she asked, small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I was just thinking," he said, setting aside his papers, "about what my father said the day he presented the contract. About how in this life, we don't always get what we want, we get what we need to survive." Clara tilted her head slightly. And he was right, but not in the way he thought. Elijah moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "I didn't want this marriage, but it was exactly what I needed, not to survive, but to truly live." Clara's eyes, still storm gray, but now more often filled with light than shadows, searched his face. "The scarred woman and the half-Cherokee son," she said softly. "Both caught between worlds, neither fitting the mold others cast for them. Perfect for each other," Elijah finished, reaching up to trace the line of her scars with gentle fingers. "Not despite our differences, but because of them." Clara leaned into his touch, the barrier she had maintained for so long now lowered in the sanctuary they had built together. "They still call me that scarred woman in town sometimes," she admitted. "I heard Mrs. Patterson just last week." "And yet here you are," Elijah said, "stronger than all of them combined." "Here we are," Clara corrected, drawing him up to sit beside her, building something neither of our fathers could have imagined. Outside, the wind howled across the plains, but within the walls they had strengthened together, winter held no power. What had begun as a calculated arrangement had blossomed into something rare and precious, a partnership of equals, a marriage of minds as well as hearts, and the beginning of a legacy that would change not just their families but the entire territory for generations to come. For in the end, it wasn't the land or the cattle or the water rights that mattered most. It was the courage to see beyond appearances, to recognize the strength in what others called broken, and to build bridges where others saw only walls. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Establish security perimeter and prepare for extended monitoring protocol Delta. The order represented a fundamental shift, from suppression and confiscation to protection and study. The documentation team was being repurposed as the foundation for exactly the kind of controlled introduction process James had proposed. "Your grandfather would be proud," Chun told James quietly. "He preserved this legacy at great personal risk, knowing someone in your family would eventually complete what he started." As the team reorganized under Hayes's new directives, transforming from extraction to protection, James watched Lily continuing her intuitive interaction with the communication. Her natural ability to engage with these patterns suggested capabilities that transcended conventional understanding, perhaps qualities that Thomas Reeves had recognized in his own lineage and had deliberately preserved through the continuity protocols. What had begun as a desperate veteran father's reassignment to base housing had evolved into something profound, the fulfillment of a legacy spanning generations and potentially the beginning of humanity's greatest evolution in understanding. The journey ahead would be complex, challenging, and filled with moments that would test both James's military discipline and his commitment to his daughter's future. But standing in the hidden room his grandfather had preserved, watching Lily engage effortlessly with an intelligence that had been reaching across unimaginable distances for longer than he had been alive, James felt something he hadn't experienced since losing Sarah, hope, not just for himself and Lily, but for the potential of human understanding to transcend its self-imposed limitations. The discovery in military base housing hadn't just shocked the military establishment, it had cracked open a door that decades of institutional fear had tried to keep sealed. And through that door lay possibilities that would transform not just their lives but potentially the course of human history itself. As night fell over Fort Benning, the old duplex scheduled for demolition had become the focal point of humanity's most profound opportunity, a chance to embrace a relationship with intelligence beyond Earth that had been patiently, persistently attempting contact for generations. The house had indeed chosen its occupants perfectly, bringing together the military discipline James had honed through combat experience and the intuitive understanding Lily possessed as her birthright. Thomas Reeves's legacy hadn't just been preserved, it had found its perfect fulfillment in the unexpected partnership of a father and daughter who had opened their minds to possibilities beyond conventional understanding, transforming potential tragedy into profound opportunity. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.